Hello and welcome to Take Me Home, the podcast offering a social democratic alternative for the politically homeless. I'm Sebastian Moore.
And I'm Hilary.salt.
And we are filming today.
First time.
This might be the first time certain people are seeing us.
Indeed,
It's a weird thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They might turn off now.
Right. Didn't realise they looked like that. Okay, so what are we talking about today?
I want to talk in the news section about Andrew Gwynn, the disgraced and dismissed Labour minister.
Who said some silly things.
Indeed.
I would like to talk about Asylum, in particular Denmark's record low asylum applications that were granted last year.
Interesting stuff, yeah.
And then we'll be joined by Ron Brown.
That's right.
And Ron is an expert in adult social care.
Correct.
So that'll be interesting. Right, shall we start with you?
Yeah, shall I kick off?
Yeah, go for it.
You didn't mention we've got Culture Club at the end, so in case that's what people turn on for, we are going to do that as well.
That's true. There might be a lot of people that sort of are here just hanging around waiting for Culture Club.
I think so, yeah.
And I've got something for Culture Club today.
That's great. That's good. Okay. So, Andrew Gwynn, the row blew up on Sunday. The Mail on Sunday published some disclosures from a leaked WhatsApp group. I think this goes back to like 2019, so there must be thousands and thousands of them. And I kind of pity the poor person who's going through all these WhatsApp messages, because it seems to be one of those groups where everybody just vents their spleen. So it's a group called Trigger Me Timbers.
Why is it called Trigger Me Timbers?
I have no idea. I did try and find that out, but I have no idea.
I did think when I saw that, I thought, okay, who came up with that name?
Yeah, I don't know. Lost in the mist of time, I think. But Andrew Gwynn MP is one member of it. There's another MP, Oliver Ryan, the MP for Burnley. Andrew Gwynn is the MP for Gorton and Denton, and was a junior health minister in government. And there's also lots of Labour councillors on this group. So it seems to be a Labour Party grouping of, people from both councillors and MPs. And people will, I'm sure, have seen and heard some of the stuff that's on it. Perhaps the most obnoxious message was one where Andrew Gwynn, in response to a letter that had been put on the group from one of the councillors, from a constituent who'd been complaining about the bins. These are the important things in people's lives, aren't they? Andrew Gwynn had said, "Dear resident, F your bins. I'm re-elected without your vote. Screw you. P.S. Hopefully you'll have croaked it by the next elections." So, not very helpful message to put on WhatsApp, particularly one that's then disclosed. And there's lots of other, it's difficult, isn't it, to say when Bants crosses a line into other things, but certainly there's lots of things that you wouldn't want to be out in the public arena. People are calling lots of it sexist, racist, anti-Semitic. I mean, I think most of all it's just juvenile. All of these messages have been disclosed by a member of the group, presumably a member who either didn't say anything bad, or part of the deal for him disclosing it was that anything he said that was bad wasn't disclosed. There's some allegations that disclosure has been motivated by some local political rivalries. We don't really know, I don't think. So, what's happened as a result of this, the fallout? Gwynn has been sacked as a minister, and he's been suspended from the Labour Party. And I think even some of the people that we talk to are quite politically engaged have got a bit confused around this, because he's not sacked as an MP, he still is an MP. It's up to his electors to remove him. But there are only very narrow circumstances in which electors can use this petition to recall MPs. And they have to do something really pretty bad. They have to be sent to prison or suspended from the House, or they have to be caught fiddling their expenses. So they have to do something really bad in this kind of narrow stream of things for a petition to be raised by electors. And if 10% of electors do sign such a petition, there is another election.
And that was a law that was brought in by David Cameron, wasn't it?
I think so. It's quite recent, yeah. I don't know.
If 10% of electors sign the petition and it triggers an election, that MP can then stand again.
They can.
It doesn't disqualify them from standing.
Absolutely, they can stand again, yeah. It's kind of an interesting thought experiment, isn't it? If you could recall at any time, what would happen? We might be forever going to the polls. It might be another of those, what, another election moments. So he is still an MP, but he is not a minister anymore, and he is suspended from the Labour Party. And lots of the councillors have now also been suspended from the Labour Party. They call it administrative suspension. I'm not quite sure what that means, but their Labour Party membership is suspended. And obviously everybody deeply regrets. There's a certain choreography and language that you have to use in these circumstances, isn't there? And you always deeply regret what you might have said. It would be quite interesting if he'd said they were private messages and we all say things that we wouldn't want to be made public in private. Right, but he didn't say that.
Or, unfortunately, the lady in question is still alive.
Oh.
Right, that would be bold.
That would be bold, yes. Yeah.
I'd respect him a little bit more if he came out and said that.
Yeah. He would very deeply regret that if he said that.
Yeah, I'm sure. There'd be an apology for the apology.
Yeah. Now, I guess on one level it's hard not to kind of enjoy his humiliation a little bit because, I mean, some of the messages just showed he's had a real contempt for the electorate. And he is somebody who has in the past been very vocal about cancelling other people, including Roger Scruton. So, you know, on some level you kind of think, well, he's got his just desserts and it feels like it's his own comeuppance. But I do think we should be quite careful about allowing this barrier between the public and the private to be eroded. I think people should have the ability to say things in private that aren't then shared publicly. I mean, we'll all have said things that we don't want to be made public.
I don't think you can stop things getting out because there's always going to be a chance of somebody leaking stuff. But I do think we as a public can sort of look at that and say, okay, it was a silly comment and a WhatsApp message. I think it indicates a little bit about what he actually thinks.
It does,
sure.
Absolutely.
But also, I don't care. I care about what when politicians do more than what they say.
Exactly, absolutely. And there's, a few people have been commenting on that. Somebody said it's really important to respect the sanctity of the WhatsApp group, which I quite like that idea. What happens in the WhatsApp group stays in the WhatsApp group.
Have you ever written something down where you thought, if that came back and somebody mentioned it years later, that would make me look bad?
Yes, yeah. I mean, if people take anything from this podcast, I would take away the idea that in your WhatsApp groups, you set the settings to delete things after a month. Because
I just don't write anything down. Even if there's something with a friend that I think, this just sounds really bad, I'll phone them because I think messages get lost in chats. Humour gets lost when it's written down. It does.
Yeah. And I think, there's a wider point about people think that transparency is really important. And in some things it is, but absolute transparency, I think, makes people more dishonest. If every single conversation that you have is going to be made public, you will never say what you think. And if people think that this is about making politicians more honest, I don't think this is the right thing to do, to make private conversations public. I mean, especially for MPs who, in public, do have to watch everything they say. They, more than anybody, need the opportunity to vent and to, have a rant in a private space. And I don't think that should be taken away from them. I think even worse, we've now heard that the Greater Manchester Police have issued a non-crime hate incident against Andrew Gwynn following complaints.
I mean, that's slightly funny, isn't it? Like, it's hard not to recognise that part of me that says, there you go.
So she's right, yes, yeah.
Oh my goodness me.
You reap as you sow. But, you know, this is nothing to do with the police. The police really shouldn't be getting involved in this. So I thought it was a news item that's worth discussing and just trying to take a little bit of a step back from the idea that he's got his just desserts and just understand a bit about how important it is for us to have some private space.
Yeah, and I think a lot of politicians will act very wooden, and they qualify everything they say because they're terrified of being taken out of context. And they create this persona that is intended to be electorally successful, right?
Yes.
We've seen this. So Andrew Gwynn,
Yeah.
I saw him at the election count because obviously you and I
Yes.
both, our election counts at the last general election were with all of the Manchester constituencies, the 6 of them, and Andrew Gwynn was there. He was the last one on, if you
Yes,
remember. It was about 5 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
and I thought, no, I'm off. But you get a feel, and I don't know him personally, but you get a sense from these Labour politicians and people, it is like this weird sort of club, like these cronies, you know, the minions hanging around the MP.
Yeah.
And you feel like they're just almost like non-people. They kind of, like they don't have a personality. And I think when they ball that up inside, then naturally it's going to show. The cracks will show at some point. And these have been shown on a WhatsApp group from a few years ago, right? Yes,
yeah. And as it goes back to 2019, I think if you wear a mask, the mask will slip, as you say. That's right. And actually, when people are a bit more authentic, I think people like them more. People liked Boris, didn't they, for being fallible and not perfect.
Yeah, exactly. And Andrew Gwynn, I mean, I don't know what his intentions were when he got into politics, or what his dreams are, what his aspirations are, but I can't see that he's going to have any big impact in our political system. And he has followed the path which so many politicians have to follow, which is to be loyal to the party, to say the right things, to do the right things, and you'll get into government. And you'll get into government by default, really, because if you think about, Labour have a lot of MPs, so there's an awful lot to choose from to make ministers, but generally the convention is you don't make a first-time MP a minister. So when you look at how many MPs, they didn't have many before, they don't actually have that many to choose from, and there's about 100 ministers and junior ministers in government. So really, you're having to make most of your MPs that were there from before and put them into government. And there'll obviously be people in maybe like Corbyn and Corbyn's faction that you can't go to. But people like Andrew Gwynn are sort of there by default just because they've said the right things and they've played the game. I
mean, to be fair to him, he has had a long stint in the Labour Party. He was one of the youngest ever elected councillors. He was elected councillor at 21. So he's kind of done his time.
What's he done?
I confess I don't know much more than that, than that he's... I don't know, if you Google him, it's quite interesting if you Google him, some of the things that come up are he had almost a little wrestling match with Boris on Sky News. Yes. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, it's worth going and watching that.
It is. Yeah. It's quite funny. Clearly, he's decided that the health department is where he wanted to, make his mark, being a junior health minister. So,
well, if you're listening to this, Andrew Gwynn, do make a rebuttal. Tell us what you've achieved. Tell us why you're in politics, and we'll allow you to make your case.
Absolutely, yes. As long as you don't wrestle us.
True.
So, is it time to move on to your issues, Sebastian?
I've got to compose myself. Okay, yes, Asylum. So, the story that caught my eye was that Denmark has hit a record low for the number of asylum applications that they've granted. So in last year, they granted 860 asylum applications, which was a fall, and is only beaten, if you like, in terms of the low number, by the number in 2020, which was a bit of an anomaly because of COVID.
So what was it the year before that? How much of a drop is it?
I don't know, that's a good question.
Sorry.
You're asking me things I haven't written down.
Researched, okay.
We're doing this without notes today because we're on camera. So
yes, yeah.
It's hard. Without my screen with all the information. So without looking, how many asylum applications do you think were granted in the UK in the same period?
80,000.
Okay, not bad. 67,978.
Okay.
Hardly any, right, compared to the 80,000 you suggested.
It's close. I think that's very good.
It's a good guess, yeah. So this zero refugee policy, which is being termed in the media, has actually got a lot of support in Denmark. So the ruling party in Denmark, and anybody that doesn't know this might be thinking they're right-wing, they're maybe the right-wing populists. It's the Social Democrats.
Oh, wow, okay.
And led by Mette Frederiksen. And the Social Democrats have been in power, I mean, on and off for the last 15 years. They have led the polls for the last 10 years. So since 2015, they have not been knocked off first place in the polls.
So it's not like the Labour Party who were elected and then immediately became massively unpopular.
It's not like the Labour Party. And I would say they are drastically different from the Labour Party. And I think very similar to what we aspire to in the SDP. So they recognise that the economy they're sort of centre-left on the economy. They've got the social democratic model, whilst also recognising that people aren't in favour of importing, hundreds of thousands of immigrants and granting all these asylum applications.
You're confusing two things there, if you don't mind me saying. So asylum applications is one thing, importing labour as legal immigration is something different. Okay.
I said doing that and doing that.
Okay.
It comes in the same week as the announcement that the UK will deny citizenship to small boat refugees.
Yeah.
So anybody arriving via dangerous methods won't be eligible to apply for citizenship. I think that seems like a reasonable move, don't you?
I always think there's what you might imagine as the kind of typical thing that you imagine as somebody asylum seeker is, which is women and children fleeing a war-torn zone. And I have a lot of sympathy for those people, but I mean, the people that we see arriving on boats in the UK, that they're not like that at all. They're very able young men. And for them, I agree. I think they shouldn't have a point in time when they suddenly become able to apply for citizenship.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, it seems crazy that we would have ever done that. Because if somebody arrives illegally in your country, to say you would allow them to stay indefinitely is one thing, and then to say that you would allow them to apply for citizenship and to become a British citizen just, to me, seems outlandish. So there's a couple of questions that come from this. So what is asylum is one,
yes,
and how does that compare to refugee? So people will always use these terms interchangeably.
They do, yeah.
And they're different. They mean different things. So asylum seekers are those that arrive in a country and apply for asylum.
Okay.
So they say, I would like settled status in this country. Now, that can be after they've arrived in the country. Let's say they've arrived illegally and then they go to an authority whilst they're here, or they turn up at the border. Obviously, in the UK, it's slightly different because we have a sea border all the way around. So in order to get here, you've already sort of arrived illegally. Now, a refugee is somebody that has been granted settled status. Now, refugees often arrive through resettlement schemes. This is where a country will go into another country using usually a third-party organisation and say, we will resettle a certain number of refugees that are internally displaced,
yeah.
Internally displaced, or maybe in a neighbouring country.
Okay, so for example, the people who've arrived from Hong Kong in the northwest. Right,
so Hong Kong and Ukraine is slightly different.
Okay.
And I can't quite figure out why, but they're not included in the numbers of people that we've granted refugee status to. And I'm not too sure why that is. So excluding Ukraine and Hong Kong, how many people do you think did we grant refugee status to through a resettlement program like this in 2023?
Oh, I think that would be quite low, maybe 20,000.
1,123.
Oh, sorry, it is very low.
Very low. And part of the reason why is because we are focusing constantly on the people that are arriving in small boats. And so we're not doing the conventional method or what we would have done in the past, which is to look at the people that are vulnerable in these other countries and take them. And like you were saying about the people that are arriving in these small boats, the media might portray it as women and children, but mostly it's young men.
Yeah.
And I thought it was something that was interesting is that I helped out an independent candidate in the local elections last year, and he was Somalian, and he arrived in the UK as a refugee. And he said to me one day when we were leafleting, he said, "What do you think of this Rwanda scheme that the Conservatives have got?" And I said, "Well, I mean, I don't like it because I think it's a bit of a gimmick," and I sort of explained my take. And I was surprised because he said to me, "Oh, it's a great scheme. It's stupid that we were allowing all of these people to come in on the boats."
That's
I said,
interesting.
"Really? Why is that?" And he said, "Well, they're the ones that can afford it." He said, "These are the rich people from these countries. You know, in the media, you might think that they're the vulnerable, poor people, but if they can afford around £5,000 to cross the channel, these are not the poor people that we should be helping, because the poor people that are vulnerable and displaced are there still in these countries or in a neighbouring country."
I think some of them will be like that, but others of them, they will get their passage in return for working when they get here, won't they? They'll effectively be part of, not quite a slave economy, but they will be bounded workers once they get here, won't they?
Is that true?
I think so. Yeah. Again, we're straying into areas we don't really know about, but I think there will be a mixture of people on the boats, not just people who have paid.
I don't know. That's a good question.
Don't people say that when they abscond, so when people arrive on boats and they're put in one of the hostels, for example, a number of them abscond because they have somewhere to go to, and that somewhere is somewhere where they will be working in either the very illegal economy in terms of drugs and that kind of work, or they will be working in a way that effectively pays off the price of their passage.
Okay.
It's all very medieval, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's horrible.
Yeah, because I think as a country we've neglected our duties, I think.
Yes.
And okay, so another question that derives from this is, how is Denmark able to pursue this policy, and why can't the UK? And
remind me, Denmark isn't in the EU, is it?
It is in the EU.
I get confused with some of those Scandinavian countries, which is who was in and who's out.
Denmark is in the EU, but it's not part of the EU asylum policy. So they've managed to remain separate from that. It's also not part of the euro. So they have a slightly lesser relationship with the EU than other countries. Why is it then that they can pursue this policy? Well, a lot of people in the UK will talk about the ECHR, which is the European Convention on Human Rights. Denmark is a part of the ECHR. Now, I can understand the arguments for leaving that, but Denmark proves that you can do these things while still remaining in parts of these conventions. Part of the problem in the UK is that we've incorporated the ECHR into the Human Rights Act.
Correct.
Which was passed under Tony Blair in 1998. And that makes it very, very difficult for us to maintain a strong border, because everything will go to the courts and the courts will just go against the government, as we saw with the Rwanda scheme.
Yeah, so my understanding is it's the interplay between the ECHR, the Human Rights Act in the UK, and the effect of existing case law. So it's that case law has also made it more difficult for courts to rule against, the kind of policing of borders in the way that we might want them to do.
Yeah.
So I think, if we want to unpack it, just leaving the ECHR doesn't do it on its own. You've got to do more than that. And it's a whole package of action we would have to take in order to allow us to do some of the things we would want to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how is it going down in Denmark? This is very popular, presumably.
Well, they're still leading in the polls.
Yeah.
it seems to have broad support across the spectrum. Something I found interesting is that one of the ministers involved in this said 85% of the population are with us. There are 15% on the far left that are opposing this, but 85% are with us. And I really believe that we should be enacting policies that have broad support. And I think for a lot of things, there is what I would call the middle 80, right, where you've got a huge section of the population that are behind this.
Yeah.
And you might get 10% on either side that are crazy or coming up with wacky ideas.
Yeah.
But we should be looking to represent the majority of the population.
I agree. Do we have evidence for that, for your 80% there?
Oh, that's just something I
you just made that
came up with myself, yeah. The middle 80. Yeah. I think it has a ring to it, though, the middle 80.
It does.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to have a look at some evidence base for it, though.
Well, I don't know. I said it. People can trust me.
Okay. Trust me, I'm a politician.
Yes. In Bring Me Solutions today, we're joined by an expert in the care industry, Mr. Ron Brown, who is a trustee of the campaign Our Life, Our Choice. Welcome, Ron.
Hello, Sebastian. Thanks for having me on.
It's good to have you. Been excited for this. We've been trying to set up for a while, haven't we? And I'm very excited to talk to you about this. So can you just start off by telling us a little bit about Our Life, Our Choice?
Yeah, so Our Life, Our Choice has been going for about 3 years now. The momentum is picking up, and we're a lot more active in a lot more different spheres. Essentially, it was started because parents were concerned about the effectively forced closure of the care facilities of their grown-up children. So you may or may not know that care villages are no longer registered by CQC, which is the regulator, and over recent years, about 40 of them have closed. So they're not in line with the current orthodoxy, and maybe we'll go into that a little bit more. But Our Life, Our Choice, I was invited to join about 3 years ago. We've started off in a kind of behind-the-scenes, low-key way, engaging with CQC. We've had 3 meetings with CQC. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get a solution or movement or traction even, although they were very polite. I didn't attend those meetings myself. They were very polite, and it's quite clear what some of the issues were. And so following that, we've obviously escalated things. We've had a parliamentary launch a little while ago, and we've got a conference coming up on the 3rd of April. We've got a website online that people can check out if they want to. We don't accept donations from the government, statutory agencies, or indeed large corporates. That we just, there's very clear sighted that that's what we want to do. We want to save these villages. We want them to be part of a care option that's available to families and their loved ones, and indeed communities. And I would also say that what's been helpful is that in the time we've been able to develop an approach to social care which would not only allow for those villages, but would also allow other options. So there's a genuine diversity of supply. If you look at what's happened in social care, apart from some of the concerns people have about it, is that there's an increasing what I would say homogeneity of supply, and that's the direction of travel. And let's be honest, one size doesn't fit everybody.
And Ron, just explain what is a care village?
So a care village, the regulator has designated care villages a congruent setting. So congruent settings are settings where you might have in a care village there might be 20, 30, up to 100 people live in separate houses, bungalows, adapted accommodation, and they live as a village. I mean, obviously there's good and bad provision across any form of delivery, but assuming they're not insular, assuming they're open to the community, etc., all good things, you would expect a certain category, a certain cohort of person with a learning disability who's highly vulnerable, might find it genuinely difficult or even unsafe to live in an open, in a way that's favoured by the modern orthodoxy. So we just feel that needs to be a choice for families where it's appropriate and where it's been deemed eligible. We sent out freedom of information requests to local authorities, and apart from CQC no longer registering them villages for some time now, a good number of local authorities won't even place in those villages, even where they're the right response to an individual need. So it is a concern. What might be worth bearing in mind is that this is really a kind of orthodoxy that's based, we think, as far as we are, from there's an evidence-based resistance, obviously, to very large psychiatric hospitals, what used to be called, in the parlance, the colloquial parlance, used to be called psyche bins. They weren't great places. It's a good job that they closed down, but the conflation of care villages with those is incorrect, is not evidence-based, and we would say the fact that the regulator and a good number of local authorities have set their face against this sort of care as an option for people who want it and need it, we feel that's a kind of ideological position as opposed to an evidence-based one. We've got fabulous people who work in this charity. One of them is an excellent researcher, chemist by trade, PhD, fabulous researcher. He has gone through all the reports, all potential evidences, all recent studies, and demonstrated quite clearly that this position is not evidence-based. He'll be speaking at our conference. So that's important to us, because obviously if there's a particular care delivery that is very poor in itself from an evidence-based, then we wouldn't want to encourage that. But where care delivery is good, we want that as an option.
Okay. And tell us today, you wanted to bring up a couple of problems and hopefully a couple of solutions.
Well, I mean, in terms of these villages, the problem is that, as we say, about 40 of them have closed. People have been evicted. They've lost their homes where they've been in their homes for, maybe 30, 40 years. So the two problems are, one, that's happening, and two, people are having restrictions on being able to be placed in these villages if it's suitable for them to receive care in that way. So there's two problems. The solution is quite simple, really. Our Life, Our Choice have identified a sentence in what is the latest CQC regulations, effectively, which is a paper around the culture and the type of care that they're encouraging, and we would like that changed so that villages can be allowed, can be registered, and that local authorities are not kind of encouraged to not use them. So that would be our solution. That would keep the villages available as a choice for people who want them, and it would also stop their closure, their forced closure, effectively. Another area that we think it would be incredibly helpful in, we've currently got over 2,000 people with a learning disability who are in very secure accommodation, assessment and treatment units. Now, the government has been looking to empty these units for decades. We've got people who've been in those for 20, 30 years. They've not been convicted by a court. There's obviously some legal mechanisms whereby they can be detained in these places, but very often they go in for a matter of weeks and they stay in for years, some of them decades. So we feel these villages would be a fabulous solution to emptying those ATUs, which we do not think are a great way of responding to the care needs of those particular learning disabled adults.
Can you tell us a bit about some of the kind of people who would benefit from care villages, and also perhaps tell us a bit about what happens to them when they're evicted? Where do they go?
Yeah, so I can tell you about the type of people. it would be people who have who are highly vulnerable, or whose behaviours would be difficult to manage in a community setting, who may be a danger to themselves or a danger to others, and who would find the kind of what's now seen as the gold standard, whereby people live in mixed accommodation up to 6 in a normal high street. The reality of that outside of the kind of rose tinted glasses, the reality of that is that people often live very lonely lives. They're subject to all sorts of nefarious activities. We know there's something called cookering, where literally gangs move into learning disabled people's homes, sell drugs from them. They're kind of seen as friends at first, and I've witnessed and experienced that in my work. That's not to say that type of accommodation and that type of mainstream life is not great for the vast majority of people with learning disabilities. That is a realistic, sensible aspiration. But for people who are outliers, for people with the sort of significant problems I've mentioned, that is not a good solution. Now, what happens when people are evicted? That's a very, very good choice, a very good way of looking at it. We know with older people where they're forced to evict, that mortality goes up in the first year very highly. I'm not suggesting that would happen with a younger cohort, but of course, what do you think would happen to you if you were forced to live your home of 30 or 40 years? People that you saw regularly on a daily or weekly basis, you no longer saw. Any activities you were involved in, perhaps employment you were involved in, your connections to the local community were lost to you. And perhaps being forced as an adult, maybe in your 30s or 40s, to go back and live with your now older parents. Nothing wrong with that if you choose to do that and they choose it, but on a forced basis, it doesn't take a lot to realise that this is not, the unintended consequences are not good.
So it sounds like this is something where the solution is already there. It's already been enacted and we're regressing. Now, the CQC, so the Care Quality Commission, why are they against these villages?
Well, I think they're not against them, without thinking they're doing the right thing. As I say, I think there's been in our opinion, as a campaign, there's been a conflation of care which clearly was not right, was not fit for purpose. Large, long stay hospitals, clearly they're not a good thing. And there's been, we believe, a wrong-headed conflation of smaller care villages, which are organisms themselves with links with the community, their own kind of individualized housing, perhaps various other activities based in the community, some in the actual village. So we think they've just got it wrong. They've just got it wrong. But that's not to say, there's any malice in that. Obviously, it's just a different view. Also, there's also, I don't know, they haven't framed it in terms of finance, but there may be a view in some local authorities that somehow that's an expensive option. We would disagree with that. The way care funding works in this country is that budgets are so split that very often a lot of exercises of placement are just around cost shift. So you have to look at the whole public purse, you have to look at the health outcomes. It's a much more complicated picture than what a local authority might be paying for an individual placement, because that's not the total cost of care anyway.
Why are the CQC calling the shots? Like we talked about Quangos a few weeks back, and the Care Quality Commission is a non-departmental public body. Have the government sort of outsourced that decision making to them so that they can have this influence?
Well, I think the CQC come in for a lot of criticism, and I do think some of that is really unfair. Would you need a regulator in the care sector? yeah, I think you probably would need a regulator. So the issue then becomes one of what is the care system that you want, and what is the type of regulation that you want. Now, a secondary part of our campaign, we're not just about saving villages. We like the idea of a choice-based care system, so there's much more diversity of supply. It seems to me CQC have got involved in what good care looks like, what in terms of what sort of care you ought to have. Now, personally, I don't think that's a great place for a regulator to be. I think the regulator should focus very heavily on is care in a particular facility safe, and also is it fair enough? Is there something inherent in any one particular type of care that is unsafe? Well, large long stay hospitals we know are unsafe. So that's fair enough. So I like CQC. I think it's a good idea to have a regulator, but I think that probably when it reaches into what type of care it sees as good, which isn't evidence-based, I think that's probably overreach. And I also think if we move to a much more choice-based approach, there would be much more innovation and creativity in supply, and it would respond much more fully to what people with a learning disability themselves and their families and communities want to do. Because, we need to really empower people with a learning disability, their families and communities, if we're to see really good diverse supply, bottom up. It is interesting that I take your point about some of the role and function of CQC, because it does appear to have gone into actual policy areas, and some things that might rightly be seen to be the choice of a minister, really. So that does seem to have limited, to me, to limit the power of that minister. But what I should have said about the Our Life, Our Choice campaign is we are entirely non-political. We're non-party political. There are some political issues in social care, obviously, but our concern is to provide the best possible social care with the money available, and issues around funding, how funding takes place, whether it's free at the point of need. All of those are political matters. But that's not something that concerns us. Obviously, I, as an individual who works in sector a long time, have a view on those. But our campaign, what is gratifying is that our campaign is a human campaign. It's not party political. And as we've moved from talking to CQC to trying to, frankly, influence and explain to others, what is obvious is that it has got traction across the political sphere or divide. Not only divide, we've got what I would consider people who are, dry conservatives who are very supportive. Some people who are less dry conservatives. We've had great conversations with one or two in the Lib Dem party. And we've had some engagement from Labour as well. It really is a bit of a no-brainer. More choice.
We talked a little bit about money there. I was going to ask about money because I don't know if this is conspiracy theory stuff or not, but a few weeks ago we talked to Amanda Hunter, who was talking to us about elder care, and she was saying that a lot of the care homes are now run by 4 big organisations, 4 big companies, and she's very worried that kind of monopoly status of those companies reduces not just choice, but effectively creates an ability for those people to set prices and to control the market. Is there any of that going on in your sector?
Well, I'm happy to talk more broadly about that. What we know in the our campaign is specifically about working age adults with a learning disability. However, what you're going to get, if you drive homogeneity, and if you drive long, next to that homogeneity, if you drive long timescale fee incomes, then obviously that's going to be very attractive to private equity, to funds, etc., etc. So, listen, I may be in minority, but I've got absolutely no problem with private equity, with funds, with a social market. I've got no problems with that at all. But I think it's incumbent upon the state and professionals to, senior professionals who are effectively setting the market. If you set the market in that way, it will become vulnerable to, or it will be a market, which I would say it is now, where stakeholders are, the stakeholders that are powerful will be private equity, corporates, and state-based professionals. There's professional associations, but let's be honest, they're trade unions really, and fair enough. They're representing their members, but the other stakeholders, I would say, family, community, small suppliers, they're relatively weak. They've got relatively little power in comparison to those other stakeholders. So I would like to see a more bottom-up approach, much more choice, where private equity gets high returns. Let's link that to innovation and creativity and market solutions rather than shooting fish in a barrel.
Thanks, Ron. We led you away from your specialist subject there, didn't we? Sorry for that.
Oh, we will drag you into the political sphere, Ron.
Okay.
Even kicking and screaming.
But we will include details of Our Life, Our Choice in the show notes for anybody who wants to find out more about it. And you said your conference was on the April?
The 3rd of April. I'm hoping London. At least one of you will attend.
We will do our very best to be there.
All right, that's lovely.
Brilliant. So let's move on to Culture Club. Right. Hilary, did you want to start? I know you've got something. You've always got something. You're just too cultural.
I'm very cultured, yes, thank you. I wanted to talk about the Pirates of Penzance.
I've never heard of it.
Do you not know that?
Or them, or him.
So this is a musical, an operetta, you might call it, by Gilbert and Sullivan. It's a very, very famous one. You'll know some of the songs from it, definitely. The very model of a modern Major General. You know that one?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Oh, right, okay. Well, the kind of broad story is it's based on a mix-up when a young boy is taken by his nursemaid to be apprenticed. And she gets mixed up about what she's going to apprentice him into. So, in her words, I'm going to sing now just so nobody's too shocked by it. I bound him to a pirate you instead of to a pilot.
Brilliant.
Now say what you just sang.
So
I bound him to?
A pirate.
A pirate.
Instead of to a pilot. So she was meant to apprentice him to a pilot.
Right.
Which in those days would not mean somebody flying planes. It would mean somebody who goes on big ships to navigate them into a port.
Yeah.
But she got confused and instead apprenticed him to a pirate.
Okay.
So Frederick reaches the age of 21 when his apprenticeship is over. So he can leave the pirates. And he's very, very dutiful. So despite not really approving of pirates, he's done his duty to the pirates. They're quite inept pirates, to be honest. So he reaches 21, so his apprenticeship is over. So he leaves the pirates, goes away, falls in love, and then there's a bit of a plot twist around the issue of his birthday being on a leap year and whether or not his apprenticeship is still over.
Okay.
So I won't give away the ending, but there's then everything comes in then. So the things like the very modern Major General, who's the father of the girl he's fallen in love with. There are some very, very incompetent policemen, comedy policemen. There are some Beautiful maidens. That's kind of beautiful maidens in inverted commas. They're not all beautiful maidens.
What are they?
Well, they're meant to be all the daughters of the Major General, so they are varying ages and sizes and appearances. So the kind of question is, does he get to follow his heart or not? And I won't tell you what the answer is.
And where did you go and see it?
I went to see this at the English National Opera, so that's at the Coliseum in London, so that's kind of just behind the National Art Gallery, which is a fantastic place. I think there are only 2 performances of it left now for you to see, but lots of people do Pirates of Penzance. I noticed there's a Gilbert and Sullivan Festival in the beautiful city of Buxton later this year in August, so you can certainly catch it there. If you do go to the English National Opera, under 21s get in free. If there are under 21s listening to us, they can get a free ticket. But it's a beautiful building as well, so I would certainly encourage you to go for any opera that's on there.
Excellent. Would that interest you, Ron? Well, my wife's a big fan of Gilbert and Sullivan, but I've not been overly struck by just listening to it. But I think I'd probably be interested in watching the performance, particularly if it wasn't sort of modernised and put in another play. If it was like as it was meant to be. I love Shakespeare, but I don't like all these. All of a sudden it's the mafiosa. Romeo and Juliet. No. Let's hear it as was. So yeah, I'll probably be up. I'll probably be up for that. I'm susceptible to a bit of culture on occasions.
It's very, very funny as well. I mean, we were crying, laughing at parts, and it's very definitely the Pirates of Penzance, not the Pirates of the Caribbean.
Okay, I can imagine. Yeah. Right, Ron, did you have something to bring to Culture Club?
Yes, I did. I am going to look so I get the title exactly right. But I went to see Small Things Like These, Cillian Murphy. I saw it when I went to Manchester, and I'd been to Manchester for a football game or 2 over the years, but I hadn't actually stayed in Manchester. What a fantastic city.
Thank you.
I genuinely never thought, and I feel I may travel north of Watford more often.
You'd be very welcome.
You better come and see us when you're next here.
Yeah. So say again.
I said you better come and see us when you're next here.
Oh yeah, I'd like to. But I ended up staying 2 or 3 days, and I absolutely loved it. Stayed in a fabulous little studio apartment thing, which was price-wise on a par with more or less with a budget hotel. I went to see, there's a arts centre up the road. I mean, I didn't know Mancunians were cultural. It is absolutely fantastic.
Shock horror.
Tell us about the film, Ron.
Yes, I apologise. I did. So the film, what appealed to me, the performance by Cillian Murphy was the best of its type I've ever seen in the world. So there was a kind of internal voice, but you were seeing it by observing him externally. He was struggling to live in what was I'm guessing the 1930s Ireland theocracy, with all the brutality and complete disregard of ordinary people, really. And I've got an Irish heritage, an Irish background, so it spoke to me. You cannot be in an Irish family really without having been affected by that awfulness. And there was some hope in the film, unlikely, because it didn't, I don't think, can't have happened very often. I don't want to give the film away, but there's a kind of slight message of hope amongst the danger. And it talked of you could see the personal jeopardy that people took on if they stood out against what was effectively a totalitarian theocracy, to all intents and purposes. And in today's world, with some of the theocracies we see, some of the kind of even the really harsh, hopefully that time's past, but you never know, the really harsh sort of cancel culture against people who who might be contrarian or just don't accept the orthodoxy in various areas. It really spoke to me about that social control, and this performance of this gentleman. I doubt it's a kind of mainstream film. I doubt it will generate millions and millions and millions, but it was just an absolute privilege to watch. Challenging, but a great film.
Brilliant. Well, I'd love to see it. I'm a big fan of Cillian Murphy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
so what I have, for once, something to bring to Culture Club.
Blimey. Breaking news. Sebastian has done something cultured.
Yeah.
I watched a documentary at the weekend called The Mission, which shows the life and the story of how a man named John Allen Chow travelled to a place called North Sentinel Island and was killed. So North Sentinel Island, I don't know if people have heard of it before. I think it's top of my places to visit. It's number one. So it's in an island chain called the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which are really in the middle of nowhere. It's like in between India and Thailand, if you can picture that. They're part of India, but North Sentinel Island hosts an uncontacted tribe. So we don't know how many people actually live there. But anybody that's tried to visit has been killed, effectively, in the last 50 years. So it's a fascinating story because, for me, it really, and they say this in the documentary, it's a story about us when we thought we were making a story about them, right? Because I think when you look at an uncontacted tribe, it makes you look inwards. It sort of holds up a mirror and you think, what do they think of us? What do they make of us, these outsiders? And if it details the contact that they've had with outsiders over the last 50 years. Some were anthropologists, some were fishermen. This gentleman, John Allen Chow, was a missionary. So he went there to try and convert them to Christianity.
Hence the mission.
Exactly, the mission, the title. So it's I want to get this right, is it National Geographic Geographic documentary. I'd highly recommend it. I watched it on Disney Plus.
Oh, wow, you have Disney Plus?
I was gifted Disney Plus by a friend. She had a free membership that she got through a scheme of some kind, and so I am very grateful to her if she's listening. And I would highly recommend it because I think it's one of the most fascinating stories, really. And he, as a character, I think this was in 2018 he was killed, and it was quite a big story at the time, and there were a lot of memes that were made about the sort of the stupidity of this guy who's a Christian trying to go there to convert them all to Christianity. And you might think that he's a little bit naive and ignorant, but when you watch the film, I think you see a different side of him. Somebody that's very, very outgoing, very kind, very knew what he was doing and knew what the risks were and did it anyway.
Virtue can also be arrogant, though. It's pretty arrogant, isn't it, to go along and to this island and go and help them by converting them to a different way of life. I mean, really?
I would say that he believed that in order for them to be saved, he had to go and convert them. And if you believe that, and if you're willing to put your life on the line to do that, I think that's commendable. And I actually have a theory about this. So we watched the documentary, me and my housemate, and it finished, and I said, how do we know that he's dead? Because there were reports that the fishermen he paid to drop him off, who were also Christian, the reports were that they saw his body being dragged across the beach. Now, that seems like the only evidence. And to me, I think, if he managed to fake his own death so that there would be no more further contact from outside, and something he states in the film, because the film has his diaries, so they read his diaries, an actor voices him. And something he states is that he doesn't want any other outsiders. He wants it to be a mission where he enables them to grow the church within the island.
I can help you out with this, Sebastian.
Yeah.
One, I would definitely watch the film.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, and I wouldn't have heard of it. But what happened to him, he went and he saw that their culture, which worshipped the sun god, the stars, the trees, the rivers, he saw that was the true way. So he ended up being a member of their tribe. He converted, and what he realised he had to do was to discourage any other Christians going to the island, and if necessary, kill them.
There you go.
They converted him.
That's an alternate ending. That's like the director's cut.
Yeah.
No, that happened.
Yeah.
That happened.
Okay.
Well, Ron, if you ever fancy a trip, let's head out there.
Well, two things. One, I am a Christian, and two, I think people are entitled to their belief if they want it. I really don't want to be saving people.
Right.
So that's a first for Sebastian to bring something that caused
Well
that
done.
much controversy. Yes. Next week, Sebastian,
Yeah.
you're going to watch Frozen.
Frozen?
Yeah.
Why?
Because you've got Disney Plus.
Oh, gosh. That'll be the one time I use it, honestly. I don't even have a TV.
Oh, I love that. Don't have a TV. I love that. I didn't for many years. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Well, that brings us to an end. Thank you so much, Ron, for coming on. So if anybody's interested in what Ron's been talking about, do check out Our Life, Our Choice. As we said, the conference coming up April 3rd. You can get your tickets. Do like, share, subscribe. I don't know if you can subscribe to a podcast. Try it, see what happens.
You can.
You can?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Excellent. Gosh,
Yeah.
do that.
And definitely thank you very much for letting me come on and talk about the campaign. I really appreciate
It
it.
was a pleasure to have you, Ron.
Absolutely fantastic.
Okay.
We learned a lot from that as well, Ron. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks. See you.